In the summer of 2021, power companies in Texas automatically raised the temperature of so-called smart thermostats in thousands of homes to help save energy during a heatwave. Most people had no idea that their home temperature had been raised, nor that the power company's ability to do this was outlined in the fine print of their contracts. Now, if this sounds scary, well, it barely scratches the surface of what the World Economic Forum has planned with its smart cities. Today, I'm going to tell you everything you need to know about smart cities, including who invented them, where they're being rolled out, when they will be complete, and whether or not the WEF's plans will succeed. Let's start with a definition of what a smart city is. Now, the best definition I could find comes from Wikipedia. It's quite lengthy, but it needs to be repeated because it captures the full scope of what smart cities are. Quote, "A smart city is a technologically modern urban area that uses different types of electronic methods and sensors to collect specific data. Information gained from that data is used to manage assets, resources, and services efficiently. That data is used to improve operations across the city. This includes data collected from citizens, devices, buildings, and assets that is processed and analyzed to monitor and manage transportation systems, power plants, utilities, water supply networks, waste, criminal investigations, schools, libraries, hospitals, and other community services. Smart cities are defined as smart both in the ways in which their governments harness technology as well as in how they monitor, analyze, plan, and govern the city. In smart cities, the sharing of data is not limited to the city itself, but also includes businesses, citizens, and other third parties." End quote. In short, then, a smart city is a place where everything you do is tracked and managed by the government, including what you do at home. This is possible because almost every single modern home appliance has internet connectivity, not just thermostats. Fridges, microwaves, TVs, cars, and even home entry systems are all connected these days. In other words, smart cities are the dictionary definition of a digital dystopia. Now, it's important to note that smart cities and 15-minute cities are not the same thing. Although the two terms have been used interchangeably, they're different, albeit related. Whereas smart cities involve tracking and managing everything you do, 15-minute cities involve explicitly limiting where you can go. Moreover, the primary unelected and unaccountable entity pushing 15-minute cities is the C40 Cities Climate Leadership Group, whereas the primary unelected and unaccountable entity pushing smart cities is the WEF. You can learn more about 15-minute cities using the link in the description. Now, the term smart cities has its roots in a marketing initiative called Smarter Cities by tech giant IBM way back in 2008. The initiative itself seems to have its roots in a 2008 speech by former IBM CEO Sam Palmisano, which was titled, quote, "A Smarter Planet, the Next Leadership Agenda." Sam's speech is still available on YouTube and it's worth a watch if you have the time. That's because Sam says a lot of the same stuff you hear today. There's turmoil in markets, there are supply chain issues, climate change is accelerating, political tensions are rising, there's an energy crisis, the list goes on. Like today's elites, Sam saw these crises as a, quote, "unique opportunity to transform the world." He talked about how digital and physical spaces are converging, about how people are demanding a change, and how this demand should be exploited to, quote, "change the game." It sounds almost exactly like the new normal and Great Reset narratives we've been hearing from almost every single government official around the world since 2020. The difference today is that the elites actually have the technology required to impose their will on the average person. The absence of such technology seems to be why smart cities initially had a hard time getting off the ground. Amsterdam seems to have been the first to pursue a smart city initiative, and it quickly became a reference point for how smart cities elsewhere around the world should be set up. Interest in smart cities started to accelerate in the years that followed, with the European Union announcing a Smart Cities initiative in 2012 and Singapore following suit in 2014. The search trends for smart cities saw their first peak when the United Kingdom and India announced their initiatives in 2015. 2015 is also the year when Google incorporated a company called Sidewalk Labs, whose purpose was to facilitate the creation of smart cities around the world. Before you get too excited, there actually wasn't that much coordination around the creation or governance of smart cities up until that point. This all changed on the 1st of January 2016, when the United Nations announced its Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs. For context, the SDGs are 17 goals which are supposed to be met by all members of the UN, so basically the whole world, by 2030. This is why you see the date 2030 everywhere. Now, the development of smart cities is part of the 11th SDG, which is to, quote, make cities inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable. To measure how well smart cities are meeting these arbitrary goals, the Smart City Index was developed by the Singaporean University and a Swiss university in 2017. Not surprisingly, Singapore has since replaced Amsterdam as the gold standard for smart cities. Whereas Amsterdam's approach to smart cities was the management of traffic, Singapore's approach includes tracking whether people are littering or smoking in places they're not supposed to. Then, in 2018, consulting firm McKinsey & Company published a lengthy report about smart cities. The firm found that, quote, cities can use smart technologies to improve some key quality of life indicators by 10 to 30%, numbers that translate into lives saved, fewer crime incidents, shorter commutes, a reduced health burden, and carbon emissions averted. Remember these figures for later. Anyways, most of the institutions that were interested in smart cities after the SDGs were announced came from the public sector. This changed in 2019 when the World Economic Forum announced the G20 Global Smart Cities Alliance on Technology Governance. As per the WEF's initiatives website, quote,
the G20 Global Smart Cities Alliance unites municipal, regional, and national governments together with
together with private sector partners and urban residents to focus on a shared set of core guiding principles for the responsible use of smart city technologies. Moreover, quote, the Alliance partners with international organizations and city networks to source tried and tested policy approaches to these technologies. Our institutional partners represent more than 200,000 cities and local governments, companies, startups, research institutions, and civil society communities. The World Economic Forum serves as the Alliance's secretariat. End quote. In other words, the WEF will govern the smart cities that are being developed. Did we vote for this? Now, it's extremely important to note that this announcement came less than 2 weeks after the WEF had announced a strategic partnership with the UN to ensure that the SDGs are met. As part of this partnership, the WEF and its affiliates would provide the private sector coordination and funding. If you watched our video about digital ID, you'll know that the SDGs also include the development of digital IDs. You'll also know that the WEF and its affiliates used the pandemic to test digital IDs. Well, alongside this initiative, the WEF also began testing smart cities with the G20 Global Smart City Alliance. In November 2020, the Alliance announced 36 so-called pioneer cities from 22 countries around the world which would participate in a sort of study to understand how the WEF can best govern smart cities. That same year, the WEF announced that it would begin developing smart cities in Japan, Latin America, and India. If you're wondering why Japan is on the list, that's because the G20 WEF Alliance was formed during Japan's G20 presidency. Japan's interest in smart cities comes from its own Society 5.0 initiative, which was announced in 2017. Now, Society 5.0 is a truly terrifying concept. This is how it's described by UNESCO. Quote, Society 5.0 is a more far-reaching concept than the Fourth Industrial Revolution, for it envisions completely transforming the Japanese way of life by blurring the frontier between cyberspace and the physical space. Note that the Fourth Industrial Revolution is another initiative by the WEF. I digress. Now, the Pioneer City study concluded in July 2021, and the key findings were everything you'd expect. Almost no government accountability, almost no cybersecurity standards, almost no privacy, almost no accommodation for people who aren't plugged in, and almost no transparency about data use. Despite these disastrous results, the WEF continues to work on the, quote, governance of over 80 smart cities being developed in Japan, Latin America, and India. In May last year, the WEF announced that, quote, the Alliance is planning to launch more networks in Asia, the Middle East, and Africa. One can even make the argument that the WEF used the pandemic to develop smart cities. That's because the May update specifies that, quote, the Global Smart Cities Alliance on Technology Governance is led by the Forum's platform for shaping the future of urban transformation, which was established during the pandemic. Now, if you're wondering which cities will be converted into smart cities and controlled by the WEF, the short answer is all of them. This is simply because the UN's SDGs require all 193 member countries to introduce smart cities by 2030. As such, the only question is when cities will be under the WEF's control. Obviously, the goal is to turn every single city into a smart city by 2030, but it looks like the WEF and its UN affiliates are rolling out smart cities one region at a time. To recap, right now the WEF is working on Japan, Latin America, and India, and will soon be working on Asia, the Middle East, and Africa. In case that didn't make it clear enough, the WEF is currently focused on building smart cities in developing countries, with the exception of Japan. This is probably because populations in poorer countries are easier to control, and because these populations are probably begging for some usable infrastructure. Now, as far as I can tell, the largest smart cities initiative in a developing country is the one from India that I mentioned earlier. The Smart Cities mission of 2015 sought to turn 100 cities across India into smart cities. An update from August 2021 notes that Delhi, Nagaland, and Rajasthan are the smartest so far. Nagaland and Rajasthan are obviously Indian provinces, but that's what it says. This begs the question of when the WEF will shift its smart cities focus to developed countries in places like North America and Europe. This will probably happen once the WEF has experimented enough on developing countries to know how to roll out smart cities without causing a full-scale revolution. That said, some countries in developed regions are not so subtly working with the WEF already. The largest smart cities initiative in a developed country comes, of course, from the European Union, or EU. In September 2021, the EU announced its 100 climate-neutral and smart cities by 2030 mission. In April last year, the full list of participating cities was revealed, and I'll leave a link to it in the description. What's scary is that the EU's list doesn't only include major cities, it also includes smaller cities as well. It even includes a small city of just 100,000 people where the grandmother of one member of the Coin Bureau team lives. Now, he believes they only signed on because the EU will give €360 million to participants. According to the aforementioned McKinsey report, the smartest cities in Europe in 2018 were Stockholm, Amsterdam, and Copenhagen. The same report notes that New York City, San Francisco, and Chicago were the smartest cities in the United States in 2018. According to the aforementioned Smart Cities Index, the smartest cities in 2021 were Singapore, Oslo, and Zurich. Naturally, the only issue they had was housing. However, this is by no means the only issue associated with smart cities, and the evidence so far suggests the WEF's mission will fail. Now, believe it or not, but the biggest pushback to the WEF's smart cities has come from individuals and institutions that tend to be aligned with the WEF on most other issues. This is because of the use of smart city data for criminal investigations, which you'll recall was highlighted in the Wikipedia definition. These critics have pointed out that smart city data tends to result in the over-policing of specific groups, which goes against the equitable principles of the smart cities concept. This is a bigger deal than you think, because the primary benefit of smart cities is crime reduction, at least according to McKinsey. As per that 2018 Smart Cities report, quote, incidents of assault, robbery, burglary and auto theft could be lowered by 30 to 40%. On top of these metrics are the incalculable benefits of giving residents freedom of movement and peace of mind. And this seems to be the largest chunk of the overall benefit. Otherwise pro-WEF critics are also concerned about the sharing of personally identifiable data. Remember Google's smart city subsidiary Sidewalk Labs? Their first project was a smart city in Toronto, Canada. The project was shut down in early 2020 after the Privacy Commissioner resigned in protest. This is around the time that the average Indian citizen started to become skeptical of the country's smart cities mission. By 2020, all the 100 cities selected were supposed to be smart cities. However, only a handful have met the necessary criteria, and there continue to be headlines about delays and corruption. In 2021, some public sector institutions started to oppose smart cities, with Yale University publishing an article titled, quote, Why the Luster on Once Vaunted Smart Cities is Fading. The article explains how cities that were built from scratch to be smart have failed and been a waste of time and money. At the same time, other public sector institutions started to study why it was that smart cities were failing so miserably. Lo and behold, most of these studies focused on the fact that smart cities seem to be at odds with the ambitious social justice goals that many smart city types support even more. It's not just the public sector either. Institutions in the private sector are starting to realize that the cost of rolling out the surveillance infrastructure required is not worth the estimated gains, especially if personally identifiable data can't be sold. Without the private sector on board, smart cities will fail. Now, one of the best articles we came across during our research about the failure of smart cities is titled, quote, Why Smart Cities Aren't the Future. It was published in December last year by a journalist named David Sachs and is presumably supposed to promote his book about why smart cities suck. Consider the following analysis of a smart city that Google and Cisco tried to build in Kansas City, Missouri in 2016. Quote, The plan was to attempt a testbed downtown using sensors, advanced cameras, public Wi-Fi networks, and digital kiosks to connect all sorts of city services and improve them for the mostly poorer Black and Latino residents of the area. The data would reveal gaps in parking, transportation, and policing, which would lead to quicker and better solutions by city staff. In other words, it was supposed to be the textbook smart city, but here's what actually happened. According to author Berku Baikert, who documented the Kansas City project in another book, quote, To be honest, it doesn't change much. The hype mobilizes a lot of people. There seems to be change going on. Breathless proclamations are made. Articles are written. Politicians take photos with executives. But, in the end, the data is just that. Lots of data. And in the Kansas City case, the solutions proposed from that data were so impractical and disconnected from reality, driverless cars and drones rather than buses and more police patrols, that the project quietly died after a few years. End quote. David ends his article with an amazing quote which just so happens to touch on the primary issues that continue to plague the smartest of smart cities. Quote, The future of cities lies not in making cities obsolete by upending them through digital utopianism, but in doubling down on the analog things that have always made cities great. Housing opportunities, economic and cultural diversity, vibrant public spaces, a mishmash of humanity. In sum, the WEF's smart cities will fail because they can't appease their ideological allies and because they don't have the ability to coordinate the creation of smart cities from the top down. Never mind the fact that the average person doesn't want to live in a dystopian smart city that's governed by the WEF. However, this doesn't mean that the folk at the WEF aren't going to try. If you watched our video about how to resist the Great Reset, you'll know that the WEF is trying to take control of cities, states, and governments using its network of 10,000 young global leaders and shapers who are being maneuvered into positions of power. I strongly suggest being on the lookout for these individuals as well as any institutions they are associated with. They'll be easy to spot because they will be the ones pushing for digital ID, CBDCs, online censorship, carbon credit scores, smart cities, and all the other UN SDGs the WEF is pushing. Also note that ESG criteria are synonymous with SDG criteria. Now, I know this information can all be a bit overwhelming, but as a wise man once said, don't be scared, be prepared. What prepared means varies from person to person, but a good first step is being informed. A good second step is informing others who are willing to listen. After that, my friends, the rest is up to you. Thank you for watching. Like and subscribe. See you next time.